responsibility upon us even more than we have. It's not just enough to express solidarity while aiding and abetting and arming and funding the oppressors. And the UK has a case to answer here. We need to look back into the consequences of our action and make sure that we do all we can to ensure accountability on the ground. I do look forward to the Minister's comments this evening.
Stephen Doherty.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gray. It's a pleasure to serve and your chairmanship as always. And I wanted to thank the Right Honourable Member for Chipping Barnett for introducing the petition today, and to all the members who've taken part for incredibly powerful and passionate contributions on such a crucial issue. Also thank the comments from the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, but in particular my friend, the Chair of the Nigeria APPG, who has done so much work to speak out on these atrocities, not just when they happen, but long before that, in terms of the wider SARS movement and the brutality that they have been exposing. And we've heard incredibly powerful speeches today from the members from Lewisham East, West Ham, Coventry North West, Erith and Thamesmead, and indeed the SNP spokesperson. And I know there are other colleagues, as was pointed out, who would have been here, Mr Gray, but have equally been speaking out very powerfully on these issues. And I too want to thank the over 200,000 individuals who have signed this petition and its creators. And that, of course, includes many significant signatures from the Nigerian diaspora here in the UK, but also all the others who share deep concerns about what is happening in Nigeria and when it comes to wider human rights abuses around this world. This is not a country, Mr Gray, that will turn a blind eye when such atrocities are happening. And the scenes we have witnessed and the reports that have come out of Nigeria of the response by the police and the army against protesters involved in the End SARS movement have shocked us all. And of course, we've heard from many of the contributions today of the events of the 20th of October, when a group of End SARS protesters were fired upon, it appears, by members of the Nigerian army at the Lekki Tollgate Plaza, after the CCTV was taken off and after the lights were turned off. And of course, the tragic deaths and injuries that resulted as a result of that action. And I spoke, Mr Gray, to those who had been around in the vicinity of these incidents, who have seen and witnessed firsthand the brutality meted out by SARS and by those attempting to defend them. And I can tell you they were shocking testimonies, Mr Gray, and I know that many of us have witnessed the video footage and pictures of the events, absolutely horrific. Now, despite the Nigerian army having denied it for over a month, it has been finally forced to admit at the Judicial Panel inquiry that soldiers were deployed to the Tollgate protest with both blank and live ammunition. And as many honourable members have pointed out, we still see some of those protesters still in detention today, and many others having financial restrictions and other actions taken against them. And I would be interested to know what assessment the Minister has made of the situation today with those who were involved in those protests. But of course, as many have explained today, this massacre and the other atrocities that we've seen are only part of the picture. They are part of a picture of brutality over a number of years, extraordinary brutality and violations by the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, otherwise known as SARS. And the report from Amnesty International documented 82 cases of human rights violations between January 2017 and May 2020, including various methods of torture against detainees such as hanging, mock execution, beating, punching and kicking, burning with cigarettes, waterboarding, near asphyxiation with plastic bags, forcing victims into stressful bodily positions, and sexual violence and rape. It is a shocking record of behaviour. And yet few of these cases have been investigated, and hardly any officers have been brought to justice on credible accounts of torture and other ill treatment. The authorities have promised investigations, but they often have simply not occurred. And the federal government of Nigeria has repeatedly promised to reform SARS, but has failed to do so. And of course, the protests we've seen recently originate not only in that record of brutality, but in other documented incidents across the country, in Delta State, in Oyo State, and in recent days I've received reports of extrajudicial killings by, allegedly, the Nigerian army in Oyigbo, too, in Rivers. What assessment has the Minister made of those most recent reports? This is still carrying on after those shocking events that we have seen just a few weeks ago. Mr Chair, the violent repression of protesters in Nigeria is unacceptable and has garnered, rightly, international condemnation. President-elect Biden has called on the Nigerian government to end the violent crackdown. The UN Secretary-General has said that Nigerians' right to protest peacefully needs to be guaranteed and that police brutality needs to stop. And we in the official opposition absolutely agree with those sentiments. The violent crackdown on these protests must end, and there must be accountability for those responsible for such brutality and loss of life. The Leader of the Opposition, my honourable friend, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, have made it clear that the UK must act as a force for good in the world, and we must act in line with our international partners and multinational organisations, whether that's the UN, AU, the UN Human Rights Council and others, to encourage and strongly advocate for the end of this violence in Nigeria, to end police brutality in Nigeria, and crucially to call for independent investigations into these violations by Nigerian policing, security and military forces. Obviously, it would always be better if we had confidence in the systems of investigation within a country, within Nigeria, but the ongoing failures and the ongoing record of the government in dealing with SARS, I think, underpins why so many do not have faith in that process, and that is why independent investigations will be so crucial. Now, this petition specifically refers to sanctions, and Mr Gray, we in the official opposition welcomed the Foreign Secretary's establishment of a Magnitsky-style sanctions regime, which we had been calling for since 2018, to allow for targeted sanctions based on attacks on human rights and to enable us to target the wider network of perpetrators, including all of those who facilitate, incite, promote or support such crimes. And that, of course, extends beyond state officials to non-state actors as well. And the Foreign Secretary told us at the time in the House that these would be used to target, and I quote, those with blood on their hands. Well, it's clear, Mr Gray, that individuals do have blood on their hands in relation to the activities of SARS and these atrocities over the last few months. And given the allegations against members of SARS and the growing evidence of the atrocities that were committed, we would urge the UK government to use its full investigative capacity, including drawing on the evidence provided by independent human rights organisations in Nigeria and elsewhere, to identify individuals responsible for these atrocities and, if appropriate, designate them for sanctions under our Magnitsky regime. We cannot stand by in the face of such willful perpetration of human rights violations and killings, not least given our close political, economic and security relationship with Nigeria. We cannot be a disinterested or unconnected party. I want to turn, Mr Gray, to the UK's own role in relation to SARS, and we've heard this from a number of members in the debate so far. Despite initially denying it, the Minister for Africa has admitted that through the Conflict Stabilisation and Security Fund in Nigeria, SARS members were trained as part of the Nigeria policing programme, and that the UK government has been involved in training of members of SARS, despite that happening during a time when there were ongoing public, well-known allegations of extrajudicial executions, extortion, torture and rape by this unit. And I'm sorry to say, Mr Gray, but this is, while shocking, it is unfortunately not an entirely unexpected revelation to me. And it's also not surprising, and I have the review of the programme here, Mr Gray, that this was a programme led by the Foreign Office rather than DFID. Of course, UK support for security and justice reform in countries around the world can have positive impacts. But what's absolutely clear to me is that in a growing number of cases, it is not clear what impact we are having, or whether in the worst cases we are actually supporting agencies who have a role in committing atrocities or human rights violations. This is just one example. Whether it's this example or the ongoing supplying of arms to the Saudi Arabian government for use in the Yemen crisis, or the training of the Special Investigations Unit in Bahrain, which has also been complicit in the torture of prisoners, and of course they use the death penalty. The government is having to repeatedly have to come and justify its involvement with organisations and institutions that appear to breach our very own standards, let alone international law and human rights. So can the Minister tell me whether she has considered suspending support and training for such programmes for Nigerian security, military and justice institutions until she is absolutely satisfied that they are not supporting individuals and organisations who have been implicated in these atrocities? And will the government commit to a review of the effectiveness of OSJA projects? I was extraordinary to reading the summary, Mr Gray, to find that the programme was listed as scoring an A and an A in 2018-19, and that the risk was only medium. This does sound to me to be completely, out of kilter with the facts that we have heard today and that we've been hearing for many, many years. And of course, looking beyond Nigeria, given the deeply concerning news that we're hearing coming out from locations across Africa in recent weeks, what measures is the government taking to protect human rights across the continent and to tackle those responsible, whether those responsible for atrocities in Ethiopia or those who are involved in suppressing the democratic process in Tanzania and Uganda? We cannot have impunity for those taking out atrocities or war crimes, whatever their role or status, whether that's official, unofficial, official government sources, official military sources, or irregular forces who are acting on behalf of different groups, whether those are central governments, regional governments, rebel groups. It doesn't matter who they are. We cannot have impunity for those people who are carrying these out. And it appears to me a double irony, Mr Gray, that we are seeing support for wrong programmes like this when the government we hear is proposing cutting the right programmes, proposing cutting the 0.7% target, proposing cutting support to development and peace programmes across the world. And I hope the Minister will be able to perhaps reassure us that that is not going to happen. But Mr Gray, in conclusion, from the Black Lives Matter movement in the USA to the NSARS movement in Nigeria, it's clear that any democratic government must respond to the needs, first and foremost, of its citizens in providing policing and security that is accountable to the people that it serves, does not hold itself above the law, but defends the law and conducts itself in line with the principles and values that underpin it. We stand on the side of all of those in Nigeria who are calling for peace, for democracy and for the rule of law to be upheld. Killings must end, democracy and the rule of law must prevail, and the UK should be a partner to all Nigerians seeking peace, justice and development.
Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Mr Gray, and it's a pleasure to take part in this debate this afternoon under your excellent guidance and chairmanship, so thank you. Let me start by saying that I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Chipping Barnet, for securing this debate, and actually to all the members who have contributed today. We've heard from the member for Tonbridge and Marling, from Edmonton, Lewisham East, West Ham and others, and for all the contributions that you have made. I will endeavour to answer as many of your questions as I possibly can. I can't say within the time allowed because we're doing quite well on the time at the moment, I think, Mr Gray, but I know you will keep me in good order and not let me get carried away here. But this is an important debate, and the Minister for Africa has asked me to offer his apologies to those of you here in the House, and as he is away on ministerial business and he's therefore not able to attend. But I do know he has a very close interest in this topic, and I feel sure that he will be following this debate with great attention, as we would expect of the Minister for Africa. So I will therefore respond on behalf of the government in his place. We are grateful to the nearly 220,000 members of the public who signed the petition and enabled this debate to take place. There is, quite rightly, significant public concern about the recent protests in Nigeria, especially the issue of police brutality. I also acknowledge the strong feeling about this issue in this place, and I am thankful for the contributions from all colleagues today. And as I said, I will try to respond to all of the points raised. But first, let me set out the government's position on the protests and on police reform, and then I will address the topic of sanctions. I would like to assure the House that the government is following developments in Nigeria since the protests very closely. We are deeply concerned by violence during the protests, which tragically claimed lives. And I'm sure honourable members here today will join me in passing on our condolences to the families of those affected. The UK supports the right to peaceful protest. We condemn violence by any party, and in doing so, make an important distinction between the rioting and looting that took place and the original peaceful protest movement. We have raised the protests and the response to them at the highest levels within the Nigerian government. The Foreign Secretary issued a statement on the 21st of October calling for an end to the violence. He called for the Nigerian government to urgently investigate reports of brutality by its security forces and to hold those responsible to account. The Minister for Africa spoke to Foreign Minister Onyema on the 23rd of October to reiterate his tweets that recognised the Nigerian people's democratic and peaceful calls for reform and encouraged the Nigerian authorities to restore peace and to address concerns over brutality towards civilians. The British High Commissioner in Abuja continues to raise the protests with senior representatives of the Nigerian government, including our concerns about intimidation of civil society groups and peaceful activists. We welcome President Buhari's decision to disband the Federal Special Anti-Robbery Squad, the police unit at the centre of recent protests. And it's important that historic reports of police brutality and violence during recent protests are investigated fully. We also welcome the emerging dialogue between state governors and young people. In a country where more than 50% of the population is under 25, this conversation is so important in understanding the concerns of the next generation. And we also welcome the President's request for his Cabinet Ministers to do the same in their home areas. And lastly, we welcome the establishment of judicial panels of inquiry to investigate all the alleged incidents. I can also update members that the Minister for Africa spoke to the Governor of Lagos on the 11th of November, and he also spoke to the President's Chief of Staff, Ibrahim Gambari, on the 21st of November. He stressed the importance of police and military cooperation with the panels. He also expressed the urgent need for panels to progress investigations, including into the incident at Lekki. As you see from the government's written response to this petition, we continue to monitor these investigations and their outcomes very closely. We also continue to monitor progress on police reform and to support Nigerian-led reform. Earlier this year, for example, we supported civil society efforts to secure the successful passage of the new Police Act. Implemented effectively, this Act will be an important step towards a more transparent and accountable police force. Turning now to sanctions, Mr Gray, I would like to set out the government's position on sanctions. On the 6th of July, the government established the global human rights sanctions regime, and in a statement to Parliament, my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, set out its full scope. It gives the UK a powerful new tool to hold to account the perpetrators of serious human rights violations or abuses. It's a long-standing practice not to speculate on future sanctions designations, as to do so could reduce the impact of the designations. The sanctions regime complements our ongoing human rights activities around the world and demonstrates that this country's commitment to be a force for good. And we will continue to keep all evidence and potential listings under very close review. Before I come to my rounding off my conclusions, Mr Gray, though, I want to try and touch on a few more of the points that have been raised by honourable members today. Yes, of course.
Can I say I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for being here this afternoon, and given that the Minister wasn't able, because of foreign travel, to be with us today. All of us have asked for sanctions. I think it would be courteous to the committee if the Minister for Africa wrote to us outlining the government's position on this and why we are not being assured this afternoon that sanctions will be happening.
No doubt the Minister will have read hands. It's not actually in order for this group, this debate, to call for that letter. So it's a perfect sensible thing to ask for, and no doubt it may well occur, but the Minister is not required to answer the particular point.
Thank you, Mr Gray. I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her friend, and as I said, I'm sure the Minister for Africa will be following this debate. I have a few more comments that I will make on sanctions, but I would like to just try and answer a few more of the other questions and say a little bit more on sanctions, if you will just bear with me. So, I wanted to just reiterate the point that, well, on sanctions, it is a long-standing practice not to speculate on our future sanctions, as this could reduce the impact of those very sanctions. Honourable members, Mr Gray, have mentioned and raised the issue of corruption. And I agree with honourable friends that tackling corruption in Nigeria is absolutely critical to the country's prosperity and security, and to reducing poverty and inequality. And work is underway to consider how a global corruption sanction regime could be added to the government's armoury. Members also raised the issue of intimidation, and I would like to just touch on that, because I think most members here today several members certainly gave examples of intimidation that had been highlighted to them. And we are aware, Mr Gray, that some protesters have reported facing intimidation. And the British High Commissioner in Abuja continues to raise our concerns about intimidation of civil society groups and peaceful protesters with the Nigerian government. This does not build an environment for groups and protesters to come forward and really help build genuine accountability. But I can assure members that we are aware of that some protesters are facing intimidation. Members also raised the matter of UK aid. I think that was my honourable friend, the member for Chipping Barnet. And I would like to just say that and reassure her that no UK taxpayers' money goes directly to the Nigerian government. The UK provides assistance to Nigeria to meet immediate humanitarian needs and to address long-term structural issues. While I'm on the topic of aid, I know the honourable gentleman opposite does try to tempt me regarding the 0.7% commitment, but as I'm sure he would anticipate, I'm not going to speculate ahead of any spending review.
Which I just wanted to ask her if she could elaborate. I mean, I appreciate that she's not the Minister for Africa. She'll be less familiar with these specific programmes. But I mean, it was very clear in the Minister's letter to us that the UK government was funding training programmes that directly involved SARS, despite the allegations. Does she not believe there's a problem here with our wider security and justice assistance programmes, including across the world? Because we keep getting example after example after example where they're either being questioned about their impact or, worse still, that us, we're being implicated in some way in organisations that are not upholding our standards.
Thank you. The honourable gentleman must have sort of preempted some more of my notes, because I am going to touch a little bit more on the SARS programme, and hopefully I can give him a bit more detail as to you know, the work that we're doing and what we are supporting. Before I come to that, just a quick note, because the honourable lady for Chipping Barnet also raised the point of the persecution of Christians, which again I know was another important topic. And just to, you know, to reassure her that we made clear to the Nigerian authorities at the highest levels the importance of protecting civilians, including Christians, and human rights for all Nigerians. But I now come on to SARS and the Special Anti-Robbery Squad. Mr Gray, the UK supports police and justice reform in Nigeria. All assistance is compliant with our human rights obligations and our values. And through our CSSF-funded Nigeria policing programme, which ended in March 2020, Federal Special Anti-Robbery Squads, or FSARS, officers participated in training on amended Nigerian police guidance designed to improve human rights, training on public finance, and community policing workshops. The Nigeria policing programme was part of our security and justice reform programme, which is working to help deliver a criminal justice system that better protects the human rights of all Nigerians. As a result of the programme, Mr Gray, relationships between communities and the police improved in 4 states. Trust was built, with communities and the police working together to resolve safety and security issues. The Nigerian Police Force's recent adoption of the community policing framework, developed by the Nigeria Policing Programme, is a positive outcome. Our support to civil society was instrumental in the recent passing of the Police Act by the President, and this new act provides for greater citizen protections and improved police training, which we believe will benefit Nigerians. Through the CSSF-funded North East Public Safety and Security Programme, part of which is delivered jointly with USAID, radio equipment was issued to Borno Police Command. This was for police units working to improve local security and to counter violent extremist organisations, including Boko Haram and Islamic State West Africa. Borno Police Command distributed 3 radios to the local FSARS unit, which were returned after FSARS was disbanded. The North East Public Safety and Security Programme is part of our North East Africa Security, Conflict and Stabilisation Programme, working to help stabilise one of Nigeria's poorest and most fragile regions affected by Boko Haram and Islamic State, West Africa. But to conclude, I understand and I acknowledge and understand the strength of feeling in the House and among the public. The UK and Nigeria have a long and close relationship that extends beyond our governments to our people, especially through the British Nigerian diaspora community, which contributes so much to this country. And the diaspora was also raised by my right honourable friend who led this debate, the Honourable Lady for Chipping Barnett. The UK is home to over 200,000 members of the Nigerian diaspora who contribute so much to this country. And as I'm sure, Mr Gray, you will be aware, my honourable friend, the member for Saffron Walden, was the first minister for Nigeria. In terms of communications and engagement with the diaspora, on the 18th of November, the Minister for Africa led a virtual business roundtable with members of the Nigerian diaspora business community to better understand challenges to increasing trade and investment between the UK and Nigeria. And the roundtable was also joined by my honourable friend, the UK Trade Envoy to Nigeria, and the British Deputy High Commissioner in Lagos. And I know that the Honourable Lady asks whether she could request a meeting with the Minister for Africa. It would be wrong of me perhaps to commit him to that, but I can certainly pass on her request, Mr Gray. But this government will continue to press the Nigerian government and its security services to uphold human rights and the rule of law, to investigate all incidents of brutality, illegal detentions and the use of excessive force, and to hold those responsible to account. We will closely monitor the judicial panel of inquiries and continue to advocate for investigations into police brutality. The government will consider its options as the panel's work progresses. The government would also continue to work with the Nigerian government and international and civil society partners to improve the accountability and transparency of the Nigerian police for the benefit of all Nigerians.
Theresa Villiers.
Thank you, Mr Gray. Well, like others, I believe this has been an excellent debate with well-informed contributions, with real insight, both from backbench and front bench. And I would take this last minute or two just to really urge the Minister and the rest of the team at the Foreign Office to use all diplomatic means they have available to get the message to the authorities in Nigeria that they need to listen to what the protests are asking for, and that I do hope that whilst the Minister for all sorts of reasons has felt unable to make commitments on targeted sanctions today, I think there is a really strong case for doing this, and I hope that behind the scenes the Foreign Office will continue to pursue this, so that in the not too distant future we will see an announcement on that. We've heard obviously in this debate some really disturbing accounts of what happened at Lekki, but also of a long history of brutality and extrajudicial killings, and particularly grim accounts were recounted by the Shadow Minister. But I very much hope that we also take away from this debate the optimism that I think everyone showed about the future for Nigeria. It has so much potential. As the Honourable Member for Edmonton says, you know, there's real potential for a new Nigeria, a better future. And I hope that these protests do signal a real change towards addressing those concerns around corruption, around brutality, around poor governance. Because if those issues are resolved, if we see real progress on that, we can see huge success and flourishing in Nigeria, not least in economic terms. So it's been my privilege to lead this debate. I thank all the people who signed the e-petition. I think this is a great example of the e-petition process working really effectively. because nearly 250,000 people signed that petition. We here in the Mother of Parliaments get the opportunity to urge and advocate for change and reform in Nigeria, and it's been my privilege to take part in that process.
This House e-petition 554150 relating to Nigeria and the sanction regime. Those that can say aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended.
We now come to a debate on e-petition 329, 339 and 332 789 about support for live events and weddings during COVID-19.